Well, welcome to this Bible Track Extended Edition. We're in conversation today. I've got Dr. Peter Williams, who's principal of Tyndale House, with me. We want to talk a bit about Galilee. We've launched one set, we're launching another. It's all there to enjoy, these short videos. Bible Track is a way of really just getting into the Holy Lands and experiencing it through these videos. But we know you've enjoyed the videos and hopefully the written content as well. But we wanted just to have a slightly more in-depth discussion. Tell us a bit about some of the backstory you're saying. Give us a bit more background on, in this case, Galilee. So I'm really delighted, Peter, that you can join us today. I've got to know you a bit, really appreciate you and your scholarship at Tyndale House. Tell us a bit first about what you do and what Tyndale House is all about.
Yeah, so I have the privilege of leading a centre of Bible research. It's Britain's largest library of the Bible, and we have, on a good day, 50 or more researchers working at the doctoral level or above, researching the Bible. So it's just an incredible hub of brain and mental activity, but our hearts are to serve the Lord and to serve the church. And so from that, resources go out to seek to encourage people in their faith.
Very good. Well, I love Tyndale House. I've loved being there myself. Check it out online and check out some of the amazing scholarship coming out of there. But we're focusing on Galilee. I've obviously been there because I feature in the Bible Trek videos. And I have to say, I personally found it, of all of the sites I've been to, perhaps with the exception of Ephesus, I think I found it the most moving actually, because you know, you go to Jerusalem and it's all been developed and built on, it's hard to imagine. But Galilee, it's natural. It feels like Jesus could have been there yesterday. So, Peter, tell us, you know, presumably you've been, any memories or experiences?
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything downgrading Jerusalem, which is an absolutely incredible place to visit. But yes, Galilee is very special, and you can have quieter moments there, although of course there's plenty of stuff going on around the Sea of Galilee, and it's a place where one can happily sit and eat a St. Peter's fish on the shore or whatever it is, and visit sites that, you know, basically Jesus was here to within a few yards sometimes. I mean, this is an incredible thing when you're for instance looking at the synagogue in Capernaum or something like this. This is just incredible.
It really is, isn't it? I went to that St. Peter's fish restaurant, by the way. It's very nice, isn't it? And I had a little swim in the lake afterwards, which was beautiful as well. So, no, it's a great spot. Most of our audience right now, at least, if you're watching this, you're probably unlikely to be able to travel overseas for a while. So this is our little window in. Hopefully you'll get to go there one day yourselves. But let's jump in our time machine now. You know, we've been there in the 21st century, but let's go back to the first century, Peter, and just think. Now, just by the way, when we talk Galilee, the region's quite large, isn't it? It can be used to refer to all the areas from Mount Carmel across, you know, including Nazareth. When we talk about it, I mean the Sea of Galilee, the basin, that sort of area. We've got a separate series on Nazareth launching later, but let's focus in on the Sea of Galilee, the basin area that the communities Jesus moved to and ministered in. Just before we talk Jesus, give us a little bit of the backstory here. What would it have been like, first century, to have lived in, let's say, Capernaum or one of these small towns in Galilee? What sort of education and sociology and so forth?
Yeah, well, firstly, at one level, it's a border town. So within the Roman Empire, it's there as a tax place of tax receipt as people come over from Herod Philip's territory to Herod Antipas's territory. It's, of course, therefore, why we read about tax collectors being there, and they're taxing the fish on the lake. And if you just go down a bit, that's where at Magdala people would be drying out large numbers of fish for sale elsewhere. It's a place of commerce, and so I think it's important to get that you can think of this as all a backwater. Josephus talks up the population and says that none of the villages of Galilee have fewer than 15,000 people. Now people debate that, but certainly there is a sense that there's a lot going on. There's it's quite fertile ground. There is an industry in terms of making millstones, which again is a wonderful background for Jesus saying about better to someone have a millstone hung around the neck and thrown into the depths of the sea, and of course it is rather deep in the Sea of Galilee. So a very graphic sort of image. So that's important. Education, it's difficult to know, and the reason why is obviously within the Old Testament, it's the job of the parents to teach their children the commandments of God, and it will talk into Deuteronomy will talk in terms of writing this on the doorpost of your house. Just the idea, therefore, that basically people can write and that they can pass that on to people who will learn to read it. And so there is this sense of literacy being normal and being associated with the passing on the commandments of God. Now, a lot of people nowadays tend to talk down literacy rates, think there are only small numbers of people who could read, but a lot depends on the connection of literacy and education in the Bible. Because if that's going on in a family basis, you're not going to find a lot of archaeological remains of it. So that's where I would be quite on the, I think there was a lot of literacy around. Now, later Jewish sources will talk about large numbers of schools, but a school again doesn't leave archaeological remains because it's really someone's courtyard in their house or something like that, or even out on the street where you teach. So it's difficult to get a full sense on that, but certainly there would be education opportunities for those who wanted to take them.
And the whole fishing thing, obviously, in terms of trade, regardless of how well educated people were, fishing would have dominated. The Department of Agriculture and Fisheries would have been pretty significant in Galilee. So, I mean, but you've also mentioned taxes. I don't know if you've seen The Chosen, which is a sort of dramatization of some of the Gospels, but they have this kind of backstory to Peter and Andrew that they're in trouble for paying their taxes and fishing and so forth. So leaving aside The Chosen, which many people love, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed with it. Nevertheless, that sort of backstory, pressure through taxes, fishing as the way that you have to make money and survive, is that realistic? Do you think life would have been like that?
Yes, I mean, I think there can be a tendency for people to assume that everything is just a question of raw survival. There's nothing more than that, and sometimes that comes from a sort of Marxist framework being imposed onto the remains, and people bring different theoretical frameworks to try and understand what's going on. But there does seem to be some level of prosperity as well. So I often wonder, how well-to-do the partnerships of fishermen were, but certainly James and John's father Zebedee had hired servants. So I assume that they're not the poorest. I mean, they're bringing in fish. Those fish are getting traded quite widely. If you had 16 people on a dragnet for a day, and that's with a dragnet, you could net 2.5 tons, according to Mendel Nun, a fish. Well, that's all going to sell. Now you might have to split that between people and pay a steep tax on it, but there will nevertheless. I mean, owning a boat is a significant asset. Having a house, all of these sort of things. So I think it's not necessarily just raw survival.
No, and in Capernaum you can visit what we think was Peter's house, and obviously by our standards it's not got a nice conservatory and a hot tub, right? but by first century standards, it's Capernaum's a substantial town, and those homes, the footprints of which have been unearthed, are substantial dwellings, aren't they? So yeah, that I was impressed by that. It felt like actually this is not as sort of by our standards that we can almost look back with a certain amount of historical pride, but actually these were substantial dwellings and families that had enough going on. Just thinking about language, you mentioned education. Obviously, one of the series within the series we're releasing now is this little extract from the Sermon on the Mount. The Mount of Beatitudes just above the lake there. Beautiful. I loved going there. But just in terms of language, what language do you think Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount in? I mean, there's this debate, Aramaic, Greek. What do you think?
So firstly, I want to talk about the phrase, the Sermon on the Mount, which goes at least back to Augustine. But the Latin word sermo, we can think of it as like a speech. I tend to think of it as the lesson on the Mount. because actually the way it's introduced is he sat down and he taught them.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you think of it as a sermon, you think of it as a speech, a piece of an oration, and you sort of stand up and you just acclaim it. Whereas I tend to think of this as a lesson outline. And that actually takes away from the pressure on the whole question of language. Because when you're teaching people, you teach them whatever language they need to know in. You then look at the verse immediately before, Matthew 4, verse 25. Where are the people from? One of the places they're from is the 𝗕𝗵𝗯𝗹. Well, the 𝗕𝗵𝗯𝗹 is the Greek speaking cities, or mainly on the east of the Sea of Galilee. They are, I wouldn't expect them to know Aramaic, they're more likely to know Greek. And Jesus will adapt to that. And when you look at the first 4 Beatitudes, they all begin with the letter pi, the letter P. And so actually, and there's other bits of assonance in there.
Which is the Greek letter, right? So that's
Greek,
Greek alliteration, yeah.
Well, there are other parts of it where it seems to make sense as a Greek sermon. I'm actually writing about this, not sermon, but Greek lesson, where it will talk about if the salt loses its flavor. Well, the word there is literally to be made stupid, and that really works well in Greek. Jesus says, which of you, by worrying, can add 1 cubit to your stature or length of life? And you wonder, well, is it talking of, and the translations sometimes go length of life, some people go height. You need both, because it's talking about how short-lived the grass is, and also how it shoots up, and it's got both. So I want to understand this, that Jesus uses terms like raka and mammon that are Semitic terms. At the same time, there's a Greek thing. So I think he's a brilliant teacher, and he's teaching the people in the languages they need to know.
So trilingual with Jesus then, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek?
Well, I mean, we don't actually have a lot of evidence of teaching in Aramaic. So that's the thing, that teaching in religious context could be in Greek. So Jesus seems to speak Aramaic, and we get that particularly in Mark's gospel. But when does he speak Aramaic? He speaks Aramaic to a 12-year-old girl in Mark 5. He will speak to a deaf and dumb man, where he says, "Be opened," in chapter 7, and as he dies on the cross, where he goes to his mother tongue, I think. But I think thinking about that it's not teaching. That's the language of conversation when you're talking to particular people. The 12-year-old girl only knows Aramaic. And the confusing thing is, when he heals 𝗲𝗵𝗯𝗹. I mean, 𝗲𝗵𝗯𝗹 is just an incredible name, because bar is Aramaic for son, and Timaeus is the name of one of Plato's dialogues. And so you think, well, his grandfather, called his son Timaeus, maybe because he liked Plato. But then the next one down is bar. So it's just all a mush of language. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that reminds us, doesn't it, that this was not just an isolated backwater. It's part of that swirling vortex of Roman, Greek, Hellenization, and therefore multiple cultures and languages swirling around. And Jesus was, as a communicator, I think what you're saying is he probably communicated in Greek, because that would have been the lingua franca, which if you're in front of a large crowd, that's the one that you'll get most people.
Yeah, but also, when he sends out his disciples, 70 disciples or so, to teach in places, they're going to have to adapt to whatever they're going to. They're going to go to different villages. People are going to have different language abilities. And as they're traveling down, they go down to Jerusalem, and you're going to be bumping into people who speak all sorts of languages. I don't know if you're allowed to talk about Nazareth, but it's not far from Nazareth, under 4 miles to Sepphoris, where there's a whole load of Greek. Tradition has it that Mary comes from that area. So, okay, that's a 6th century tradition and onwards, but that's still a striking thing, because I don't know how that tradition would arise if it's not got some validity to it. So if his mother has that, and of course, in Matthew's gospel, the family has at least spent a bit of time in Egypt, where they're more likely to be speaking Greek. So there's all sorts of things that can get you knowledge of Greek in the family. In the core of his sort of inner core of Peter, James, and John. Of course, Peter's brother is called Andreas, Andrew, which is a very Greek name. and Peter is often called Simon, and Simon's a name that works in Greek and Hebrew. So that to me tells me that Peter's parents, and okay, we know his father's, he's Bar Jonah or Bar Johannes. So that whatever his name is, which is maybe a Hebrew name, he's still given a Greek name to his one of his sons, and Bar is there, and that's Aramaic. So that's all three languages in one family.
Yeah, very good. Well, you've deconstructed Sermon on the Mount to what do you have? Lesson on the Mount. I actually want to change mount, because as a mountaineer, it's not a mountain, it's a hill. So can we go for lesson on the hill?
If you're going to do that, you're going to call the Sea of Galilee a lake, like Luke does. Well, not a sea.
Just give us a bit on that, then, because I know you note in you've got a really great book which I've enjoyed. I remembered you noted on it. Can We Trust the Gospels? Really recommend this book by Peter. And you mentioned in here this whole thing about the sea and the lake. I think Luke seems to think of it as a lake more than. Tell us a bit about why that might be.
I mean, traditionally Luke comes from not far from the Mediterranean, so that's the sea. And this little thing that's under 5 miles across is a lake. And there is some flexibility with these terms, whereas I think for Matthew, who's a tax collector on the edge of that, and for Mark, who's reporting Peter fisherman perspective, then it is the sea. That's the big sea. So I mean, they may have been to the Mediterranean or not, but they certainly that's the main body of water.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? Yeah. Some people I know call things mountains, and I think that's just a hill. But probably if we went to the Himalayas, we'd think everything we've ever seen is a hill. So very good. Now, Galilee, this cradle basin area, is the site of so much of Jesus's ministry. We've talked Sermon on the Mount, but unbelievable numbers of miracles and so forth. But I just want to home in for our viewers, check out the Bible track series on Galilee, because we capture loads of these stories. But one of them we capture is the feeding of the 5,000, because you can go to the Church of the Multiplication of Loaves and Fishes, which is right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Galilee, depending on your perspective. And there's that rock in there that is thought to be, tradition has it, the very stone Jesus sat on as he taught the crowds and then fed the multitudes. So, Peter, in your book, one of the things you do really helpfully is you sort of draw on some of the topography and so forth to reassure us, I suppose, actually the gospel writers are not fabricating myths, but they are recording what happened. Tell us a bit specifically around the feeding of the 5,000. Why can we rely on the accounts?
So I think it's when you look at some of the peripheral things, it's so striking. Both Mark and John comment on the grass being much or being green. Mark has, as the prelude to this, that lots of people are coming and going, so we need to get aside. And of course, where the feeding of the 5,000 is traditionally set is off the main route. John tells you it's Passover time, which is where, of course, people are going to be heading down to Jerusalem. It's really a very big festival, and so it makes sense that they'd need to get aside from that. Then Luke tells you that this feeding takes place near Bethsaida. Now, there's a couple of locations for Bethsaida, but they're both pretty close to each other. A couple of possible locations, they're both pretty close. Then beautifully in John, you get this conversation with Philip, where Jesus asked Philip where to buy bread from, and Philip and Andrew both reply. And in John also, you learn that Philip and Andrew come from Bethsaida.
Yes.
So if you don't put in the information from Luke, it makes no sense. You put in the information from Luke, and suddenly you realize Jesus is asking someone with local knowledge.
He's asking the local boy, where's the best place to get bread around here, effectively, because Philip was from Bethsaida, right?
Yeah. So it makes complete sense. Now, people can say, well, I don't believe the miracle. I understand, but okay, the peripheral details may be right. The problem is, usually when people try and explain away miracles, they say it's happening through a process of exaggeration as people will tell and retell the story. But the problem is, if you've got that going on and people, as they retell the story, changing the most central thing, namely the miracle, how on earth would they keep the peripheral things in the right shape? You'd have to have a mechanism of selective corruption of information that loses the main thing and keeps the little things. That doesn't make any sense. So And even the detail about the grass, if it's just Passover time, you've just had 5 of the greatest months of rain. Leading up to that, the grass usually is going to be green around April time. So all of those sort of things make sense.
It really struck me that I was there in early November, which is a lovely time to go. There's 2 windows, aren't there, where it's really nice to go. It's not too hot, it's not too wet. Late October, early November, and then sort of late March, April time. But when I was there, the grass was definitely, brown. You'll see it on the videos if you watch Bible Trek series, that it's all brown. And I thought about that detail. Is it John and Mark that refer to the grass was very green?
Yeah, well, one has much grass, one has green grass. But yes, it's absolutely the.
Yeah. And it's these incidental. There's no need to tell us that in terms of the main beef of the story. And myth doesn't have that, does it? Myth doesn't have those. So in that sense, I think your argument is effectively, if this was some kind of fabrication, you just wouldn't have that kind of incidental, unnecessary detail.
Yeah, an armchair fiction wouldn't get it. If you were just sitting somewhere else making up the story, you wouldn't be able to get that sort of thing right.
Especially without Wikipedia, which they didn't have in those days. Yeah, very good. Well, I know 𝗏𝗧𝗏 is a lovely little spot, isn't it? As you say, there's 2 contenders for which specific one, but the one we visited where there's an archaeological dig and they've dug up the fisherman's house with hooks and various things discovered. This is why I love Galilee. It's just like Jesus could have been there yesterday in terms of the sense of the landscape and the paths that they walked with his disciples and so forth. So just, as we wrap up, just give us your headline. Why do you think Jesus chose Galilee as his center of operations, if you like, for those 3 years? And why do you think it had such an impact?
Well, I think there's a beautiful thing where Jerusalem is the capital, and as Jesus says, that's where a prophet has to die. But it was important for him to be able to minister away from that area. And then he very movingly, deliberately makes this decision to walk into the place of danger, to walk into the lion's den, to walk into the place where he's going to die. And I find that move very significant, that he does that deliberately. But yes, it does give him the opportunity to minister in a very culturally diverse context. And in which there was, I think, quite a sincerity amongst some people about scripture. So that was important. Nazareth is arguably a priestly village. So that's another thing that would give higher literacy there, more opportunities to learn scripture as well. So I think there's a lot going for it. And of course, Nazareth was also somewhat of a nowhere. He then moves in Matthew's gospel to Capernaum, which is more of a happening place as he begins his ministry. And I think, again, the decision, Nazareth to Capernaum and then leaving Galilee to go down to Jerusalem, these are very significant choices that Jesus makes for, his way of saving us.
His ministry. And as Matthew picks up, this, of course, fulfills that beautiful little prophecy in Isaiah 9, that beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And I think that's at the heart of it. You think of Bethsaida, where Jesus heals a blind man who suddenly his eyes are open and he sees the light. You think, gosh, literally this amazing prophecy being fulfilled in this small cradle basin of the beautiful Sea of Galilee. The world is about to be transformed by the Messiah. So love it, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us. Do share Bible Trek, and do have a look at subscribing to the YouTube channel for all of our viewers. There's another set of content being released every couple of weeks. We're in Galilee for another set, then we're going to Nazareth. Join us for the journey. Thanks, Peter.